Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One thing I'd like to say first is that normally I'm known for clearing the place, so I'm glad that you all come back after lunch. That's really encouraging. The other thing is that I've spent most of the lunchtime deleting the 470 Kyoto, Copenhagen or Cancun slides that might have been in there. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about smart grids and a little bit about how the stakeholders see smart grids. Because a couple of things earlier on, I heard Justin say that it was the third conference for smart grids. Okay? In fact, have we actually moved forward in terms of what smart grid actually is and what we believe the impact is? And also, I heard the gentleman from Ofgem speak earlier on, and Ofgem talk about understanding consumer outcomes. So their whole model has changed, the way they look at it, and that impacts on how we see smart grids. So, just one slide corporate on Schneider Electric. We're actually around 20 billion euros now worldwide and about 120 countries. So we have a major opportunity in the smart grid space. However, a couple of things to set the scene first of all. Today, 6 billion inhabitants, and in 2030, around 8 billion. So population growth is an issue. However, one of the key trends that we see is that there'll actually be a move towards cities in terms of where the population sits. So that, again, presents a challenge in terms of infrastructure and distribution infrastructure in particular. Also, 2 billion people moving into the energy middle class. So generally, people have greater expectancy. They want access to more technology. So the challenge, top line, really, is that we'll have a doubling of energy demand, and we all have a target to reduce CO2 emissions by 2. So really, there's a factor of 4 from where we are today in terms of our environmental challenge. Is the environment a consumer issue? Is another question to ask ourselves. What are the drivers in business? And what's the impact of that on smart grids? Frequent power outages, rising energy prices. I think I heard 60% energy price increase in the next 5 years. That's what we're predicting. Climate change, we mentioned. And conflict in resource access and control. I heard this morning a little bit about smart metering and information. What about if we lived in a world where, in fact, the energy companies didn't sell to consumers, but consumers sell energy backwards? So you decide as a consumer what price you want to sell energy back to the network. On the right-hand side here is a graphic. And essentially it shows the top of the red line is what the consumer today believes energy demand will look like going forward. The top green bracket there on the right-hand side shows what National Grid believe they can deliver. So what will actually focus our minds? Possibly energy outages. I'm a child of the 60s, so I remember the power cuts. And early in my engineering career, I remember peak lopping in the afternoon. So believe me, we know about this sort of challenge already. However, when we look at some of the things that smart grid might be involved in, energy cost reduction might be an impact, business opportunities from a profitability point of view. However, job creation and wealth, something that this country is particularly interested in from a green point of view. We can be the experts. From a CO2 environmental impact point of view, it changes daily. Only last week there was some new guidance from the government. I think generally businesses and consumers are disengaged from that argument. They can't understand it or relate to it. We need to meet local and international regulations. Yeah? Those of you that have heard of the Carbon Reduction Commitment Energy Efficiency Scheme will know today that it looks like it's going to be a carbon tax. Well, that's the way it'll be treated, a tax. Nothing so certain as death and taxes, as they say. Saving energy is socially responsible, but is it to everyone? And as I've said, changing governmental targets. So we have some challenges to face. In terms of what does a smart grid mean, what's a definition, and I don't know how many people there are in the room, but we'll probably all have a different view. This is just one of them. It looks at electricity and IT infrastructure, looks at how it's interconnected, but in order to efficiently balance demand and supply in a complex network. Now, that may or may not be correct, but it's one way of looking at it. We believe there are three drivers: growing electricity demand that I've already mentioned, the need to reduce CO2 emissions. How will the impact of nuclear policy possibly change things? There's a carbon floor price planned, I think, for 2013 at £16 a tonne. Well, imagine if that went to £50 a tonne or £100 a tonne, mirroring things like oil prices. Will that change the investment opportunity in green technologies? Will that make us look different? I'm sorry, let's just get back to that. Also, the availability of technology as well. Security was mentioned by Darren this morning. More and more access to networks, and the more you interconnect, even internationally, that challenge becomes even greater. Government regulations, there are lots of them, from building performance certification to things like the carbon reduction commitment and the EU ETS scheme. Also, active end users. Generally, we're more aware of what's going on. We understand a little bit more how we use energy. So this is an expansion of that, and I'll pick on a couple of them. New economies worldwide is one, the changing nature. China expectancy, India expectancy, as we've said, CO2 targets. Not in my backyard syndrome was an interesting one. I saw a few months ago that Greenpeace were actually arguing against wind farms because it didn't look good on the landscape. It's an interesting one to try and rationalise. Ageing infrastructure and assets. Today, I heard it this morning, it's believed that 60% of the UK building stock will still be here in 2050. That means that retrofit becomes key. New builds are an opportunity, but retrofit is definitely an opportunity. Distributed renewable energy sources, I'll mention that more in a moment. But active energy users, looking for competitive prices. And they're also ready to play a part. So to look at their own infrastructure and how they use it. So, but the position's different across the world. So in Europe, you'll see we might have more deregulation, competition for supply, integration of renewable sources. But for instance, we've got elsewhere in the world energy theft. And that was again mentioned by Darren this morning. China, growing energy demand. But we also saw that they're doing things in the renewable area to try and support their own carbon reduction commitment. In North America, transmission overload, aging infrastructure, reliability. So it's different depending where you are. But the UK can lead in this environment. We have the skills. This is a job creation opportunity for us. This is a number produced by a report from GIMLEC. I don't know exactly the breakdown of it, but it's a big number. 50 billion per year in smart grid by 2020. So there's massive investment required, is the message from that. Again, transmission efficiency. For fossil fuels, and it was mentioned this morning, I think by my colleagues from Siemens, that effectively the network is inefficient. We only see a third of the opportunity from energy generation. So how do we look at things like carbon capture and storage? Is that a good idea? Possibly if nuclear doesn't come along, there'll be big investment in that. Photovoltaic technology is another one. Yeah? Is that efficient? In fact, is it an issue of financial return? So the energy mix that we have impacts on how the smart grid is constructed. So historically, generally, we were rather passive users. It was a top-down energy flow. When you put the switch on, the energy comes out, and we didn't really worry about it in any way. However, we need something else. We want to be smarter grids ready. This is an end-to-end philosophy. It's not just about generation or distribution or consumption. The whole of this mix has to come together. And of course, renewable, decentralized generation. What are the challenges in here? Well, some of them have already been mentioned in terms of how do you connect reliably when the supply is intermittent? How does it meet something called grid code compliance if you have wind power? Photovoltaic technology, is it a good above Newcastle in the north of the country? Possibly not. I know that it generates energy in the middle of the day when a lot of people aren't there. So how do you use that? How do you measure it? How do you get rewarded for it? Again, investment patterns are a key. So, it's a mixture. We need demand and supply management. And that means energy efficiency all the way up. Yeah, network. Energy visibility. A lot's been talked about with respect to visibility of information. But as you all know, that doesn't do anything. Yeah, you can have all the information you want, but if you don't do anything with it, it's going nowhere. So it's not only about visibility, it's about optimization as well. We've mentioned electric vehicles. Well, it's an opportunity. We certainly will need a lot of them. Excuse me. But it's about when you connect them. Yeah? When you look at the infrastructure. Do you connect them when you're at work or at home? Yeah? Or at the petrol station? I'm not sure that I'd sit 6 hours at the petrol station. If you look at it. Also, what's the range of electric vehicles? All of these things affect how you build the necessary infrastructure into smart grid. Communications, software, security. There's different levels of communication depending on where you are. But what's happening is there's more and more information. Our thirst for information is huge. Even as domestic consumers, we want to know more. So the network has to be able to cope with that. So, we've got 5 challenges. The first is to have an efficient enterprise. Yeah? And you'll see things like optimize the network first. Power factor correction got mentioned. That improves network or supply efficiency. Something that we don't necessarily regulate for in the UK, but it's an opportunity. Things like automate. Human behaviour is fallible. So the more you can automate, the more you can help manage your energy. Vehicle to grid, V2G. So taking the energy that's supplied in your electric car and feeding it back to the network when you get home. So instead of plugging it in and consuming, you're actually supplying. These are some of the innovations and challenges and things that the network needs to consider. Data centres were mentioned as well. Data centres, huge power consumers, a lot of it in the cooling. Well, in this room, what needs to be cooled? Effectively, us probably, and the projector. But apart from that, that's nothing. So when you look at data centres, actually you only want to cool the critical infrastructure. That's a huge power user. So the more you can look at optimising your assets, the better off we'll be in terms of the whole network infrastructure. The efficient home. Smart meters. Are they the gateway for controlling appliances in the home? It's a question. But sure, you can do things there already in terms of switching off infrastructure like lights. It was actually said to me that consumers can't make a difference to that. Yet really, energy efficiency doesn't count. Well, I'd beg to differ that 25 million homes probably have a different view. Yeah? Again, it was mentioned this morning, I think, one of the solutions, everybody has an energy cap. Is that really looking at the right consumer outcome by giving everybody an energy cap? I think we have to have a more flexible network than that. And connected renewable sources. PV, photovoltaics. Yeah, they're good on your roof, but are they shaded? What happens if the trees grow? All of these things have to be considered when you connect these things. Solar farms, their efficiency can be lost if they don't have a grid connection very close. Probably within a kilometre would be my view. So there's lots of ways that the smart grid can evolve. Flexible distribution, having more information. This thing about network robustity. Is robustity a word? I'm not sure. We'll have to check it later. But these days, wanting more information about transients, harmonics, lots and lots more information. And of course, the issue of renewable integration and connection is a clear challenge. Distribution network automation. All of these things are about having an end-to-end philosophy that creates a smarter grid. But a lot of it will be about using our existing assets. Integrated renewable sources, connectivity being key. Now, how do you connect to wind farms that are in remote locations? How do you get the wind power from Scotland down to the south in London? Is that where we use HVDC? Is that the technology we want? And is that where we suddenly find that we're going to be connected to the rest of Europe, which we already are, of course? How does the integration work? And how do we manage the variation when possibly we don't have nuclear for baseload?
2 minutes.
Say again?
2 minutes, please.
Yeah, no problem. So, we also have demand and supply management, using demand response, embedded generation. Yeah? This is about having revenue streams, because when you look at consumers, they want a financial benefit as well. It's not just about what we think smart grid looks like, a consumer's looking for a financial opportunity. So, lots of information depends on what you require. Yeah? Do you actually want more information so you can bill more effectively? Or effectively overbook your energy like an airline does with plane seats? It's about the infrastructure. And also, is carbon the measure? Is carbon the measure? Is energy consumption the measure? Is it finance? All of these things will be about the information we need and how Smart Grid provides that. So, very quickly, £16 a tonne. It could mean as much in terms of carbon cost as about £200,000 to an organisation. So don't mistake the financial impact of why we need a smarter grid. And if we do all of these things and have more efficient infrastructure, then actually we'll reduce the use of natural resources as well. Copper, steel, plastics. Electric vehicle infrastructure I've mentioned, but again, where do you have it? Yeah, is it at home? Is it at the office? Is it at the petrol station? All of these things lead to a smarter grid. And also, using distributed architecture in buildings, again, allows you to reduce infrastructure costs, reduce installation costs, manpower, travel, all of these things. So, infrastructure measurements and monitoring, having the control functionality in there, grid automation, building automation, information transfer. They're all out there, but for me the message is that you have to build them all together. And finally, Schneider Electric, we're responsible for helping people with information and education. So we have an online free energy university where people can register and go and take online courses to help them understand not only smart grids, but other typical technologies that use and the impacts worldwide. So I've tried to give you a view as to what I think the smart grid looks like and the impacts. You've seen the statement earlier on. Everyone can play their part in smart grids, from consumers to generators. But coordination, direction, strategy will be critical. And finally, it's make the most of your energy. Thank you.
Thank you.